shall we start?
Yay!
All right.
Over you've all been waiting for.
Ta-da! The collab we've been talking about. So I guess, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm known as Bruja Cat on all of my platforms. My real name is Cathy. I'm Puerto Rican. I grew up and was born and raised in Puerto Rico, Boricua, but now living in the States.
That's super awesome. We're actually reasonably close to each other, which we didn't know until we happened along that, being like...
I just figured that out recently, so I was like, oh my god, we need to collaborate or something.
Honestly, it was like, Great Lakes region, Great Lakes region, cat!
And this is my cat, Stormy.
Hey, Stormy.
He just likes to show up.
My dog Thor we're trying to keep him low today. He got a new toy and he's very excited about it, so trying to occupy him over there. We're gonna see how that goes. These are the truths of recording from home.
Right? Introduce yourself too.
So my name is Taylor. I'm a storm witch that follows the Norse pantheon, so I work with Odin, Freya, and Thor. Just because I've had a very long call to them, and I have family over in Norway still, so I have a deep connection with that, and it just kind of branched out into this pursuit of knowledge, just because I want to know everyone's cultures and all of their different practices and explain how it's different, how it's similar, because across cultures there's so many things that are similar and yet so many things that are different. It's so cool. So that's why I love the idea of collabs like this, because I can learn so many new things.
Which is supporting other bitches.
Yes.
But my abuelo was brujo. He helped in our little village in Caguas. He did exorcisms, and he would do cleansing for people. All sorts of limpias for people. But he died when I was younger, so I wasn't really able to follow in that path and have him as a mentor. So I don't have that privilege of having what do you call it in English? I know the word in Spanish, but it's like a godfather. To teach you and to mentor you.
Right.
Yeah, so he followed Espiritismo, Mesa Blanca, and Palo Mayombe.
Very cool. So traditionally, if he was to live longer in your life, is that something that is traditionally passed down through families? Or is that something you learn as a special interest?
Yeah, it can be, because certain practices, like in Santeria or in Palo, because you have Palo Monte, Palo Mayombe, all these different branches that have influences from ATR need initiations. So he had, his initiation was a collar, which is like a necklace. There's all sorts of different ways to be initiated. Depending on the path, you can be crowned or you can be cut. It's all so different because all these different traditions are not a monolith.
Mm-hmm.
But he did have his necklaces and his initiations. He was a priest. So if he continued to live, I would have totally loved to have learned from him. So I'm just trying to figure out what my path is right now, without that sort of influence. But I've just been contacting other practitioners, other priests, and trying to do it correctly.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's one thing in the spiritual community that we're all... the genuine practitioners are trying really hard. It's like, all right, am I doing this correctly? I think I am, but I need reassurance from someone who knows what they're doing.
Yeah, I think it's good to research about it before you do it. That's something I always try to preach to people. You need to learn, you need to research what you're doing before you perform anything. Not only for your own safety, but also because you need to understand the system you're working with. You're trying not to misappropriate it, and it's just something that I think is super important, because I understand in the witchcraft and spiritual community, we're all super excited about it, but you need to calm down.
Right. It's do your research first. Always be able to undo things that you've already done. If you don't have a fail-safe, don't try it. That's what I wrote in my warding video. I'm just stop putting holes in the veil if you don't know how to undo them. I just
video today too, so it's not like I'm obsessed or anything.
Well, it's I've seen so many different older practitioners talking about it, and I'm yeah, you can feel the energy shifts. That would explain why things are so weird right now.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So are you the only new bruja in your family, or do you come from, besides your grandfather, a long line of them?
So I think I have an aunt, Wanda, that she was like a spiritualist. I'm not exactly sure how she labeled herself. And my dad, he sort of encountered all of these like weird spiritual things going on with her because that's as so growing up together, they kind of like experienced different things. So I guess Wanda had like her background in that as well. So it does run in my family. My great grandfather and my great great grandfather were both brujos. I'm not exactly sure what or if they followed palo, but that's what my grandma told me. But I just don't have very much information about it. But my dad said that one time when my grandfather was trying to like call upon them, because you like call upon your ancestors for their power, he basically like levitated across the room. So
Too much power.
how valid that is, I don't know. I can't confirm that, but that's what my dad told me.
It's one of those, it's like, it's a cool story. Who knows if it's true, but if it is, cool. Right, we've got all those. It's like my grandfather my paternal grandfather died like 2 weeks before I was born, like to the day. And so my grandma, she'll be like, yeah, just talking to him in his chair. It's like, Grandma, there's no one there. Well, of course he's there. Just having full conversations, just casually. I'm like, all right, Grandma, do your thing.
A lot in the Latin American community. Like, I don't know if you've seen the show One Day at a Time, where the abuela, she talks to like the dead grandfather as if he's there. That's like a normal thing. Right.
Like, I'm sure it's definitely a thing across cultures. I'm like, all right, do your thing. Like, it's very open to have ancestor altars in, you know, a lot of different communities, which I didn't know until recently. I'm like learning all the different ways to do them. And you have so many different words for different kinds, which is so cool. Yeah. Like, I only took 6 years of Spanish, so I understand the vague root words of what you are saying. I'm like, I can get by, but A++. I think it's so cool. Also, just to side curve, because ADHD brain, you know so many languages.
Yeah,
like,
I just didn't know about that.
So many. When obviously I took Spanish in school and in college, and I learned Norwegian when I was a kid from a camp that I went to every summer. But I'm like, oh yeah, I'm a little more in-depth languages than people. And you start going off, and I'm like, there's so many. And she just studies them for fun.
Well, like, I don't have knowledge of like the Norse languages or the Scandinavian languages. Those are completely non-Latin based. But just out of interest, I did write down a whole bunch of stuff about runes, so I might have to share that with you later.
Oh, that would be cool, yes.
There's lots of different runic alphabets, so like there's Anglo-Saxon runes, Marco-Manic runes, I think they're called, but I'll send you these screenshots.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's like you've got different futharks, and you're figuring out, are you using the old ones, are you using newer ones? Some they have different letters, some have excluded some letters, and it's just, it's really cool.
Yeah, I love learning about it, but I feel like that's not my path. Like, there's definitely like a cultural difference here, so I don't want to, it doesn't feel genuine for me, but it's still so cool.
Right. I think that's definitely something in the spiritual community that we have to recenter a little bit, the difference between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation, just because there are so many things that you have to either be, like you said, initiated into, or that, you know, different people are like, this is a closed practice, don't, and you can learn about those things, but that means specifically not to practice said things.
Exactly. I made videos about that too. You're allowed to learn about it. Like, there's certain esoteric knowledge that is closed that you just point blank will not find out about. But you're allowed to learn people's culture and their history and like have that cultural appreciation. But for the Nordic practices that you follow, how would you define those? Like, tell them to someone like me that doesn't actually know anything about them.
So, as a Norse pagan, a lot of our scripture, a lot of what we know, like the Havamal, which is directly the words of Odin, or like the poetic Eddas, the prose Edda, they were all written hundreds of years after like the Viking Age by Christians, mainly Christian monks, because they were some of the only people that were literate at the time. So a lot of what we have has been translated and mistranslated over and over and over into different various languages. So what's happening now is this really cool movement of native Norwegian speakers and Danish speakers and Icelandic going back and going into the old texts and understanding that some things that have been translated and we've been taking as truth for so long are not really as truthful as we thought. So like Freya for a while was considered like an evil woman, and that was because evil was the word for magic. So through that, it's kind of hard to piece together a very stable, concrete understanding of like the Nordic path, just because they were not very keen on writing everything down, and hundreds of years later all of the things that were existing have been destroyed because there were a bunch of black metal bands in Scandinavia that decided to burn churches, like hundreds of old churches. So we lost all of that knowledge, all of the records that were kept in these churches. So slowly we're trying to piece together like the different scraps that we have, which is why I think a lot of Norse pagans are branching out more into the simple pursuit of knowledge instead of sticking to a strict, this is our code, this is our creed type thing. So that's why you have branches of like the, there's Asatru and Vanatru, which is like we only worship the Aesir, we only worship the Vanir, which are like the big warrior gods or like the nature gods. And to make those independent discounts both of them. So
are they different systems? Like I would compare it to like African traditions where we have like the Orisha or the Loa, where they're totally different systems. Would you compare it to that?
Yeah, so Odin is the leader of the Aesir, so it's the gods that live in Asgard that kind of take care of people in Midgard, living on Earth as we are.
With the Allfather?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, and then the Vanir are more like, Freya is the chieftain of the Vanir. They're more like the nature spirits, so they take care of the world, the water, things as we interact. They're a lot closer to like the trolls and the ice giants, just because they are more in tune with the natural world. So to only worship one of those groups, I feel discounts most of your practice because they're so intermingled. So I would say, yeah, they are different, but I feel like you just need to worship them all together. Not necessarily all of them, but appreciating that they're both really important.
Right. So I have a few questions.
Yeah.
Just because it's super interesting. So firstly, with all the different Scandinavian languages, so in that area, I understand that they have their own dialects.
Yes.
That someone from Finland or someone from Norway won't necessarily be able to understand each other.
Yes.
I know that there's differences when they're reading it versus when they're speaking it. So does that influence retaining some of this ancient knowledge?
Yes, so I'll speak from Norwegian specifically because that's what I know most about. So in Norwegian, there's Nynorsk and there's Bokmål. So in Nynorsk, that's the general dialect that people speak. That's what you interact with in a very casual tone. Bokmål is more of what's written, and that's usually easier to translate into the old text because it's a little bit closer to Old Norse. The problem comes because Scandinavian languages are very similar because they're Germanic, but I can kind of grapple through Swedish a little bit because it's the closest to Norwegian, but Finnish I have zero idea. So
yeah, that's so fascinating to me, just because languages are like my hobby. I just love learning about them. Even if I myself am not fluent or even familiar in any of these languages, I just love their etymology and their history and how they work together and develop.
Absolutely. Well, it's like different dialects in South America to Central America. Like, they're all technically different versions of Spanish or Portuguese, but it's so different from regions. So I feel like it's the same thing in Scandinavia.
Yeah, if you compare Puerto Rican Spanish or different areas of Caribbean Spanish to Central American, like Mexican or Guatemalan Spanish, it's totally different.
So are there like root words that you guys can kind of be like, okay, I know that means this, or is it just like, this is totally...
So, like, because we came from the Spanish, that sort of like formal Spanish from Europe, the way that it developed in the Americas is what makes it different. So we still all speak Spanish. We can all understand one another. We just might have different words for certain things. So, like, for example, we have regional slang for stuff. I know Puerto Ricans use a lot of, like, Spanglish because we're, like, a U.S. territory, so we have a lot of English influencing our language.
Right.
But if you take, for example, the word for a car, in Puerto Rico, you can say carro. In somewhere else, they call it la máquina. In Central America, they call it coche. So it's all just different variations. There's like 13 different words for a straw. I don't know why.
Just because. That's awesome. Well, I guess we kind of brushed over the general idea. How did you get started on your path? When did you decide that you were interested in witchcraft? What drew you to it?
Oh my gosh, I think I was watching Kiki's Delivery Service. That's where it all started. When I watched Matilda.
That's what I want to be.
No, I think it's something that I always grew up with. So growing up in Puerto Rico, in La Selva, in the rainforest, in my grandmother's house, I would climb mango trees and literally like talk to them. And so I think that's literally where it started, was that
talk
sort
to
of
trees too?
Literally like that animism thing. And whenever I saw animals, I would like talk to the animals and try to whisper things to them. And I still do that today.
Yup, same. I thought it was crazy, dude. I thought that was weird. And then I got older and they're like, no, there's a word for that. It's because you understand that everything has energy. I'm like, there are other people.
When I go into the ocean, that's like my sanctuary. You know, when I go to the beach, when I go into fresh waters, that's always been like a huge thing for me. And then like when I would climb those trees, I would stay up there until like nightfall and then watch the full moon. And I just felt like that connection with the moon. And when we went to the beach, I could feel like the sun rays and stuff, but it meant a lot more to me. And later on, I realized, it's because I'm a witch.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it's like...
So, yeah, it all snapped.
It all snaps together. I feel like we all have different, I don't know, things that we got to that was like, all right, here's your direct path. This is letting you know, this is your marker right here, that you're going to be a witch later. One of them is probably, did you talk and hug trees a lot as a kid? Did you feel like they were your friends? Probably a witch.
It's something that's so intuitive for little kids that when we grow up, we feel like we need to reason with it more.
Yeah.
But when we're little kids, it's like you don't question it. Like it just makes sense. So like when we're older, it's like society tells us like, no, this is how it's, supposed to be, whatever.
They tell us to grow up and then things just get boring. That's one of the things with a lot of like mythical creatures and things that people have discussions with me about. It's like, when did your imagination stop? Like, when did it get so difficult for you to rationalize that sometimes things aren't rational?
Oh my gosh, right? Well, I'm also an artist, so that completely resonates with me because, like, when did your imagination stop?
That's the same thing. Like, I'm a writer, so it's like I am always in my brain. I can create great, giant fantasy worlds that don't have anything to do with reality. And it's like, the only way you can come up with that is if you keep your childlike intuition and your imagination intact, and it just makes life more interesting.
Yeah, I think that's something that the spiritual community, the witch community, has, that you have this mentality where you're open to possibility instead of being like closed-minded in your worldview. There are certain mysteries, and I think that's why a lot of people are really intrigued by the occult, even though they say like, oh, I don't know if I believe in this or that, but there's still that mystery of intrigue.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like to be a witch, you need to be just completely curious about the world.
Yeah.
And taking into account, modern science and everything, but sometimes it's just nice to go, this is how they rationalized things dozens or hundreds of years ago, and to them, that makes sense.
Yeah. And so, like you said with science, a really good explanation that I have is like from X-Files. The Mulder in me wants to believe, but the Scully is always skeptical. So I always try to explain it with mundane answers first.
Yes.
And then, later on maybe try to try to explain it through other spiritual means or something.
Yep.
But yeah, I had an instance recently where my Titan lamp turned on in the middle of the night. And this happened like 3 times in a row, and I was like, okay, what the hell is going on? But it wasn't until later on that I realized it was short-circuiting, so I had to unplug it. So
I have so many people.
But
always.
Then part of me is like, calm down. You can explain this.
Yep. Well, it's like I have people messaging me on Instagram, and sometimes they'll ask me questions like, which crystals and herbs should I get into? I'm trying to fix this thing. And it's like, okay, take a step back, and the, therapist in me comes out, and it's like, all right, do you really need those things, or do you need to fix the problem with your life that's causing you to have these issues? And then they're like, wow, I didn't think about it that way. It's like, you can hold on to that black tourmaline as much as you want, but if you still hate that person and resent them, like, that doesn't go away because you're holding a rock.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's there's a word for that in brujeria called a plática. So the plática is like a consultation that you have with that practitioner, the espiritista or brujo or curandero or whatever, to discuss like what do you have going on. So it's like a therapy appointment, a consultation, and depending on what's happening, they can figure out what the next step is, because you don't just knee-jerk jump into something thinking that's going to be the solution. You don't put a band-aid over a broken arm.
Yep. That's so much more stable than I feel like a lot of things in modern witchcraft are. There's always an herb for this, there's always a crystal for this. And it's just like, sometimes there isn't. Sometimes it's very mundane. You got a problem with your relationship, fix your relationship. You don't need a love spell.
Mm-hmm.
Good Lord.
I've had to tell people no to love spells because that's not something that I can fix. That's something only you can fix. But you can definitely think of any sort of spiritual practice, sort of quick fix. People want that quick fix. They want the sort of like witchy aesthetic thing going on where they think that whatever jar, whatever candle they do, whatever ritual bath is going to cure their problems. But if they don't do the work themselves, they need to actually do the shadow work, which is a new term, but it's basically like a psychological technique where you are assessing yourself and doing introspection. So you need to actually do the work if you want progress. You can't just carry a crystal as a talisman and pretend it's going to work.
Good old Carl Jung. It's like, we talk about some of his ideas and concepts when I was still studying psychology, and it's just like, it's not that abstract of a topic, and yet it's been very skewed with the term shadow work. It's, you gotta do your shadow work, you gotta do these things, it's ritualistic. It's like, no, it's just journal.
Just journaling, yeah.
Just write down.
People want to act like everything has to be this really formal ritual, but honestly, it's just about journaling. It's just about, taking a moment to meditate. And I did a whole other video about the Western misconception of meditation. But it's just like, thinking about things in a practical manner, not in a mysticism manner. Yes. So these crystals that you're using, yes, they are talismans and amulets, but they're basically stress balls.
Yep. You just hold it, you squeeze it really tight, and you're like, all right, do I feel better? Yes. All right. It's like, do I know that this jasper is going to help me? No, but if I squeeze it when I'm having road rage, I feel better. All right. Then even if it's a placebo effect, it's helping, and that's fine.
If it's a placebo effect, even in all of your spell work, it's still like a healthy reminder to you, not to take things so seriously, to make sure that you're keeping your positive energy and you're not letting negative energy influence you.
Right, exactly.
It's just little reminders like that.
And I feel like that's all it should be. Witchcraft should be just a supplement to your already existing life.
Yeah, exactly. So I think when people say that they are a witch, do they do that in a projecting sort of manner out online, or is it just integrally part of their lifestyle? So like they just do it on a day-to-day basis. And so things like cooking, making your coffee, like washing your face, like little things like that, all of it are little rituals. They're just not like formal, you know.
Right, exactly.
Let's talk about diversity, because we're from completely different worlds,
completely
different
separate
paths. What do you think about diversity in the witchcraft community?
Well, I think that as like I'm on the path for pursuit of knowledge, it's so cool that so many different paths can just project themselves online. So I didn't know anything about hoodoo. I've got a different like plethora of practitioners who are just explaining the different concepts of hoodoo to me. I'm like, that is so cool. There's no way I would have known that if the internet didn't exist. And I think it just makes us stronger as a community if we're willing to be, as you said before, open-minded and just accepting of each other's practices. It might not look the same as yours, but it's just as valid. And I think we need to get away from this weird monolith of this is what witchcraft looks like, and if you're outside of this weird threefold Wicca controlled just domain, if we can get out of that, there's so much more to learn.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people maybe began hearing about the neo-paganism and witchcraft community through like Wiccanism, you know, just because they saw that online. But now that we're getting more diverse practitioners, we're able to hear about stuff from other parts of the world. I think it definitely helps for awareness. And it doesn't mean that you have to follow that path, but now you're aware that it exists. And if you're interested in it, you can research into it. So
Right.
That definitely helped a lot of people that I've seen comments from the Latin American community saying, oh my gosh, I didn't know that this existed. Like, this makes so much more sense, because I know a lot of them were on the same bandwagon of like neo-paganism or spirituality or Wicca, and they were just trying to find their path. But like me, it didn't feel genuine. It didn't feel like from my culture. And so I think it helps them to understand that there are practitioners out there. And even for me, I didn't realize that there were Jewish witches, that there were like Romani people online that are still practicing. So there's like so many new things to me as well.
Right. So, I don't know, it's just, the internet, I'm coming to realize, because I was always very anti-technology, and then the pandemic happened. It's like the only way you can communicate with anyone is through technology. So I've slowly warmed up to it, and I've realized that it's miraculous that we can have conversations like these. Like, we're not even close to each other, but we can discuss our different practices, and you can just message anyone on any platform and just be like, hey, you want to chat? And they can say no, and that's cool, but sometimes they're like, yeah, let's chat.
See, that's been super helpful for me, because I'm like the only bruja in like a 1,000-mile radius where I live. So I don't have a botanica that I can go to. There's not other brujas or practitioners around me. So having a way to communicate with people online has been super helpful for me in finding my path, making sure that all of my information is accurate and how I'm doing things, how I'm performing my craft is accurate too. But I think the internet is also a double-edged sword, because there's lots of misinformation going on around.
Yes.
So, like you said before, people feel like they're walking on eggshells. You know, that there's like this huge cloud of like closed practices.
Yep.
Listen, if you don't have a problem with misappropriating people and misappropriating their cultures, you're not going to have a problem with closed practices. So it's like, if you're not racist, then you're not going to be afraid of being labeled as racist.
Right.
You know? So you're not going to do those things because you know that you're not supposed to do those things.
Right.
But with the internet, there's just a plethora of information, and how people sort of file through them is being lost, where they don't know how to go to different resources to make sure that they're legit. So when people cite their sources, they don't understand that you can't just quote something that you saw on social media, because that's an entertainment platform.
Yep.
It's not an actual resource. So I think learning how to do your research is definitely something that the witchcraft and spiritual community needs to learn to do too.
I feel like that's just something that as a society we need to do better, is critical thinking. Look into who your sources are and why you would possibly say the things you're saying.
Yeah.
It's like it's an agenda.
Well, it's also difficult because it takes a lot of work to do research, and people don't want to put in the work. They just want the results, you know? So it's sort of like our internet age. They want instant gratification.
Yep.
But with certain spiritual practices, you have to put in the work. That's like the whole point.
Honestly, it's just like, you have to put in the work. This instant gratification just generation that we're experiencing right now is so fixated on everything. I want to be an expert right now. I want everything to be in my brain. I don't want to do any of the research myself. I don't want to do any of the work. And at the end of the day, it's like, being a witch should be a lifelong commitment to the pursuit of knowledge. And if you're not willing to put in that time and that effort, then you're not going to get where you want to be. In order to be an old crone, you have to be young and stupid first.
Well, it's a decades-long thing, and you are going to make mistakes, of course, but a lot that I see, like especially on Witch Talk, it's beginner practitioners leading beginner practitioners. So, yes, we should definitely share the knowledge that we have with one another, but we also need to make sure that, like, that information is accurate. So not just taking people's word for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, I think I love having conversations like this and collaborating with you. I'm trying to work on collaborating with other practitioners too, just so we can have conversations like this. And I know that TikTok only lasts 1 minute.
Yep.
There's so much you can say in 1 minute, and going back and forth in the comments, a lot of tone is misconstrued, and this way we can actually communicate with one another. So I hope that we can continue to do collaborations like this, and it's like, hopefully I have this vision in the future. It'll be like the ultimate crossover of like Avengers but Broom edition.
Yes! I love that. I think as long as we keep having conversations with an open mind, we'll just learn more, and that's the whole point of all of this. So totally here for it.
I'm totally down to continuing this series and communicating with you more, and I want to do more like comparing and contrasting from our practices. So I want to see like where our paths are similar and how they're different, how we do things differently. So cool.
Absolutely. I'm so here for it.
Cool.
Well. Yeah. Thank you so much for stopping by. This was delightful. Hopefully this will be a series of things so we can have lots of these conversations, because that's all I want here. If you want to go check out Bruja Cats, she is that on TikTok. She is on that on Instagram. She is on that on YouTube. I will list all of the things. Somewhere over here he will list it. But until next time, skull my friends. Bye.